I think this general goal is a big part of what therapy offers. For all of us, there are parts of our lives about which we are unconscious, and so it can seem like the cause of things exists outside of us. But as we start to expand our awareness, then we have more ways to participate in our lives. We have something that we can actually do to shift things, and instead of life happening to us, we start to live our lives. In this manner, by using a formative approach, I was able to get at the heart of the issue. Her migraine resulted from an organization that went in and up. Muscle sheets, fascia, soft tissue, blood and breath circulation, all organized inward and up into her head. Her body was enacting a kind of retreat. Why was she retreating? Because she'd experienced trauma. Some part of her boundary had been violated. She didn't have a solid boundary with which to meet the world. In fact, it was clear that Deborah had known no in relationship to others. In spite of her apparent hostility, she had no way to keep people out. And without a way to keep unwanted things out, she had nowhere to run but in and up. A huge turning point for her happened while her migraine was spiking in the middle of a session one day. I asked her to put her hands out in front of her palms facing outward, in a stop position. As she did that, things changed for her. She took a huge sigh, and I could see a whole army of nerves, circulation, and muscles moving down and out. Her breathing slowed. On this energetic level, I watched a piece of her come downward into her body. It was amazing. And she looked at me with this gaze that was slightly stunned, yet excited. "The headache is going away," she said. It seemed as if extending that boundary for herself created a container for her to come out and into her body. In this stop position, she was keeping the outside out, making room for herself within her own body. As a result of this space, more of Deborah's presence could enter her body. And the moment her presence took a step forward, I believe grace showed up as well through the remission of pain. From the standpoint of trauma theory, what we were doing was finishing a gesture that never got to complete itself. Peter Levine writes in his book, Waking the Tiger, that post-traumatic symptoms are fundamentally incomplete physiological responses, suspended in fear. Levine is the founder of Somatic experiencing, an embodied approach to working through trauma. He studied videos of how mammals responded to traumatic situations, and what he found was that after experiencing danger, they naturally discharged nervous system energy through shaking. While all animals enter into an automatic fight, flight, or freeze response, in humans, this energy can get arrested if the nervous energy generated by fear isn't consciously released. For humans who don't do this, Levine writes that symptoms of post-traumatic stress will not go away until the responses are discharged and completed. In the case of Deborah, she'd never been able to push away those people and forces that were violating her. As we practiced the simple movement of her arms extending outward into a stop position, we were enacting a form of protection that her body never got to complete. And as we enacted this gesture, ripples of energy trapped in her nervous system could be released. On multiple occasions, I saw these tremors move out from her shoulders all the way through her fingertips. In addition to this, as she could hold a more solid boundary that kept unwanted things out, she also created more room in her body for her own personal presence. I would call that presence her soul. Instead of being organized in and up in a gesture of retreat, some part of her literally descended more fully into her body, moving downward and outward. In so many ways, we were helping Deborah to step into her body and out into the world. We spent months elaborating on ways for Deborah to set a boundary with me and create room in herself. And it was 7 months into our work that our journey took a climactic turn. One day, I was inspired to say to her, "Okay, I'm your pain. What do you want to do with your pain?" "I want it out of my head." "Okay, and in your body, what do you want to do with your pain? Would you like to push me?" "Yes," she said, "but I'm afraid. I don't know if I can do this." "That's okay," I said. "We only have to go as far as you want, but I'm here. You can push me as hard as you want, and I won't go anywhere." I wanted her to know that no matter what she did to me, it wouldn't ruin the relationship. And then she said, okay, I want to do this. I asked her to put me exactly where she wanted me in the room, and then to position herself exactly where she wanted to be in the room, at just the right distance between us. I stood there with my hands at my sides waiting for her. I felt like I was not only representing the pain in her head, but also every other man that had violated her in the past. I was her junior high stalker. I was the boy who date raped her. I was the father that stole $10,000. I was countless other men who had crossed the line with her because she couldn't set a boundary, hadn't built the capacity to say no, or wouldn't speak up for her needs. And then it happened. With a force summoned from a place larger than her 5'2" frame, she shoved me back several feet, thudding heavily into the wall as she shouted, "Get the fuck out of my head!" I held myself against the wall as she sat there with the aftermath of the explosion. She looked down, panting, arms wrapped around herself. She was shaking in that familiar mode of nervous system discharge. The deepest breaths I had ever seen her take started to flow through her entire torso. She sat down in the chair, shaking even more violently. I could see the discharge tremoring through her arms, from her shoulders out through her fingertips, and recognized the fight impulse, the incomplete gesture that she never got to finish, now coursing through her limbs. And then she finally looked up at me with a beauty emanating from her face that I had never seen before. I was awestruck. It was almost as if the features on her face had rearranged themselves so that a completely different person was looking back at me. There was no more scrunching, no more furrowing, just this smooth, open serenity. I believe in that moment, her soul entered her body more fully. At that point, I got back into my chair and I returned her gaze. I'm still here, Deborah. I haven't left, and I won't leave you. And I still really love you. The words surprised me as they floated out of my mouth, but I knew that they resounded with the truth from my heart. We both began to cry as I realized she felt it too. And there we sat in that glowing space she had created for herself. The relationship remained intact. Her body relaxed, and we both basked in the quiet grace that had entered the room.